The chamber fell silent as Ambassador Chen walked through doors that had witnessed 10,000 years of galactic diplomacy. Her footsteps echoed against walls carved from crystallized starlight, each impact a reminder that humanity stood alone before the oldest civilization in known space. The Galactic Council sat in their crescent formation, beings of such ancient lineage that their homeworlds had long since become myths even to themselves. They looked down at her with eyes that had seen empires rise and fall like tide pools in cosmic storms, and in those ageless gazes, she saw something that chilled her more than their obvious power. They saw pity. They saw weakness. They saw a species that had begged for peace with trembling voices and desperate pleas. The Vraxian Prime Speaker leaned forward, his chitinous frame creaking with the weight of millennia. Ambassador Chen, his voice resonated through translation matrices that turned his subsonic rumbles into words she could comprehend. Your species has made its position abundantly clear. You fear conflict. You seek harmony above all else. This we respect, even as we find it curious. The other council members shifted in their seats, a rustling of scales, membranes, and forms beyond human categorization. When the Krell hegemony violated your outer colonies, you retreated. When the Xinthian swarms consumed your mining operations in the Kepler belt, you withdrew further. When pirates raided your trade vessels, you filed complaints and waited for our intervention. He paused, letting the weight of humanity's perceived cowardice settle over the chamber like ash. We have concluded that humanity is a species fundamentally opposed to warfare. A pacifist civilization that will endure any indignity rather than raise arms in anger. Chen stood perfectly still, her face an unreadable mask that would have made her poker-playing grandfather proud. She had been chosen for this moment not because she was the most diplomatic, but because she could stand before the powers that shaped galaxies and show them nothing but controlled calm. Prime Speaker, she began, her voice carrying clearly through the vast chamber, I believe there has been a fundamental misunderstanding. The council members exchanged glances that spoke volumes in languages beyond words. One delegate, a being of pure energy contained within a crystalline matrix, pulsed with what the translation software interpreted as amusement. You believe we are pacifists, Chen continued, taking a single step forward. You believe we fear war. You have watched us retreat, withdraw, and petition for peace, and you have drawn conclusions based on what you have observed. She paused, and something in her eyes made the ancient beings shift uncomfortably. But you have never asked us why. The chamber erupted in a cacophony of sounds, from melodious chimes to deep thrumming bass notes that vibrated through the floor itself. The Prime Speaker raised one clawed appendage, and silence returned like a curtain falling. Explain yourself, human. Chen reached into her diplomatic pouch and withdrew a small holographic projector. With the council's permission, she activated it, and the air above her palm shimmered into an image of Earth, blue and green and achingly beautiful against the black of space. My species evolved on a world that tried to kill us every single day. We fought predators with nothing but rocks and determination. We survived ice ages and plagues and disasters that should have ended us 1,000 times over. And then, when we finally achieved sentience, when we finally built civilizations, we turned our weapons on ourselves. The hologram shifted, showing images that made even these ancient beings pause. Cities in ruins. Mushroom clouds rising over devastated landscapes. Trenches filled with the dead of wars fought over inches of mud-soaked ground. We have fought over 5,000 major wars in our recorded history, Chen said, her voice steady but carrying an undercurrent of something the translation matrices struggled to identify. Pain. Pride. Warning. We have killed each other with stones, swords, bullets, and weapons that could crack our planet like an egg. We perfected the art of destruction so thoroughly that we built devices capable of ending all life on our homeworld, and we built them by the thousands. The hologram showed missiles in silos, submarines lurking in dark waters, bombers flying in precise formation. We became so proficient at warfare that we frightened ourselves. So we made a choice. She looked up at the council, and every being present felt the weight of her gaze. We chose to be better. We chose to seek peace not because we were weak, but because we knew exactly what we were capable of. We didn't fear war, Prime Speaker. We mastered it so completely that we understood its true cost. The Xinthian delegate, a collective consciousness housed within a swarm of biomechanical constructs, rippled forward. Its voice emerged as a chorus of whispers that somehow formed coherent speech. Pretty words, Ambassador, but words do not change facts. Your colonies burned while you talked. Your citizens died while you petitioned. Your merchant vessels exploded while you filed grievances. You speak of ancient wars, but we see only modern cowardice. The chamber filled with sounds of agreement, a symphony of alien affirmations that Chen weathered like a sailor in a storm. She had expected this. The intelligence briefings had been clear. The Galactic Council viewed humanity as a useful client species, productive and creative but fundamentally lacking the spine necessary for true independence. They had accepted Earth's petition for membership not out of respect, but out of the same benevolent condescension that zookeepers showed particularly clever primates. You are correct, Chen said, and the admission silenced the chamber more effectively than any argument could have. We did not fight back when the Krell attacked. We withdrew when the Xinthians consumed our facilities. We endured pirate raids without retaliation. She advanced another step, and something in her movement made the Prime Speaker's combat instincts, buried under layers of civilization but never truly dormant, flicker to life. But you never asked what we were doing during those retreats. You never wondered what we were building while we filed our complaints. You never questioned what we were planning while we petitioned for your intervention that never came. The holographic projector in her hand flickered, and the image of Earth was replaced by something else. Something that made even these ancient beings lean forward with sudden, sharp interest. It was a star chart, but not of any region they recognized. The markers were placed in patterns that suggested strategic thinking of a sophistication that most species didn't achieve until their third millennium of spaceflight. Every attack we endured was a lesson, Chen explained, her voice taking on the quality of a professor lecturing particularly slow students. Every casualty we suffered was data. Every retreat gave us time to study our enemies, to understand their tactics, their psychology, their weaknesses. The star chart zoomed in on a sector near the Krell border, and the council members who specialized in military strategy felt their equivalent of heart skip beats. The defensive positions humanity had established weren't random retreats. They were a carefully constructed funnel, a trap so elegant that it could only have been designed by minds that had spent thousands of years perfecting the art of war. The Krell thought they were pushing us back. They thought our withdrawal was surrender. They never realized they were being herded exactly where we wanted them. The hologram showed fleet movements, supply lines, and communication networks. The Krell had overextended themselves pursuing what they thought was frightened prey, and in doing so, they had created a military situation so precarious that any competent strategist would have called for immediate retreat. Chen's expression remained neutral, but there was something in her eyes now that the council had never seen in a human before. It was the look of a predator that had finished playing with its food. 3 hours ago, the Krell launched what they believed would be their final assault on our colony at Proxima Centauri. They committed 70% of their total military fleet to the operation. They expected to find frightened colonists and whatever minimal defense forces we could scrape together. She paused, and in that moment of silence, several council members began accessing their communication networks, pulling up real-time data from the Krell border. What they found made them question everything they thought they knew about humanity. What they found instead, Chen continued, was the 3rd, 5th, and 7th human battle fleets, along with orbital defense platforms we've been quietly constructing for the past 18 months, and weapon systems that we've been very careful not to mention in our technology disclosures to this council. The hologram shifted again, now showing real-time footage from the battle. The council members watched in stunned silence as human warships moved with a precision that spoke of countless simulated battles and real combat experience stretching back through millennia. These weren't the desperate maneuvers of a species learning warfare. These were the calculated movements of apex predators who had been temporarily content to let others think them harmless. The Krell fleet, massive and imposing, found itself unable to adapt to tactics that shifted faster than their command structure could process. Human vessels used gravity wells as weapons, turned asteroids into kinetic bombardment platforms, and employed electronic warfare so sophisticated that Krell ships began firing on each other, their targeting systems corrupted by viruses that had been quietly inserted into their networks during every previous encounter. "We didn't fear war," Chen said softly, watching the council members process what they were seeing. "We feared ourselves. We feared what we could become if we let that ancient part of us, that part that survived 10,000 years of warfare on our homeworld, out of its cage." The Vraxian Prime Speaker's mandibles clicked in a pattern that the translation matrix struggled to interpret. Finally, it settled on a single word: impressed. But there was something else in his posture now, a wariness that hadn't been there before. "You have made your point, Ambassador. Humanity is not weak. But this display of strength, this deception of the Council, this violation of our trust, what do you expect us to do with this information?" Chen turned off the holographic projector, and the images of human military might vanished, leaving only her standing alone before the assembled might of galactic civilization. "I expect you to understand that when humanity asks for peace, we are not begging. We are offering you a choice. We have seen what we are capable of. We have walked through the valley of our own shadow and emerged on the other side, determined to be better than our history." She met the Prime Speaker's multifaceted eyes without flinching. "But we will never be helpless again." The silence that followed was different from before. It was the silence of recalculation, of ancient minds revising assessments that had seemed so certain just moments ago. The delegate from the Saurian Concordat, a species that had conquered 24 star systems through military might before joining the Council, broke the quiet with a sound like grinding stone. "You speak of choice, human, but you bring us threats wrapped in philosophy. You show us your weapons and call it enlightenment. How are we to trust a species that has hidden its true nature behind a mask of weakness?" His massive form shifted, armored plates sliding over muscle and bone that had evolved under gravity 3 times that of Earth's. "You have deceived us. You have violated the spirit, if not the letter, of Council law. You have withheld information during your membership petition. Give us one reason why we should not view this revelation as an act of hostility." Chen had prepared for this moment in countless simulations, in diplomatic training sessions that had pushed her to the breaking point and beyond. But standing here, before beings whose civilizations had thrived while humanity was still learning to make fire, she felt the weight of her species' future pressing down on her shoulders. "Because," she began, choosing each word with the care of a demolitions expert disarming a bomb, "we are not the only species in this chamber who has hidden aspects of their military capability. We are simply the first to admit it." The chamber erupted again, but this time the sounds were different. Defensive. Angry. Caught. The Saurian Concordat maintains a fleet twice the size reported in official disclosures, hidden in a pocket dimension near the Horsehead Nebula. The Vraxian Collective has biological weapons that violate 14 Council treaties, stored in facilities that officially don't exist. The crystalline minds have been developing artificial intelligence beyond the permitted parameters for 300 years. She delivered each revelation calmly, matter-of-factly, and watched as the Council members who had been so quick to judge now squirmed under the same scrutiny. "We know these things," Chen continued, "because unlike you, we didn't spend our first 50 years in space exploring and expanding. We spent them watching, listening, and learning. We built observation networks that you never detected. We developed cryptography systems that could break your so-called unbreakable codes. We did what any intelligent species does when they find themselves in a room full of predators. We learned everything we could about those predators before revealing ourselves." The Prime Speaker made a gesture that might have been respect or might have been resignation. "You make a compelling argument for mutual hypocrisy, Ambassador. But you still have not answered my original question. What do you want from us? What is the purpose of this revelation?" Chen took a deep breath, and when she spoke again, her voice carried the weight of every human who had ever looked up at the stars and wondered what was out there. The Krell attack on Proxima Centauri was not random, she said, pulling up a new hologram. This one showed communication intercepts, financial transactions, and a web of connections that linked back to members of the very council sitting in judgment of her. It was encouraged by certain parties who believed that a demonstration of human weakness would be useful. That our colonies could be sacrificed to prove a point about the necessity of council protection. That our suffering could be leveraged for political advantage. The temperature in the chamber seemed to drop. Several council members suddenly found their communication devices extremely interesting, while others projected waves of carefully controlled neutrality. We have evidence, Chen continued relentlessly, that suggests 3 council member species provided intelligence to the Krell about our defensive capabilities, or rather, our supposed lack thereof. We have proof that certain delegates actively discouraged intervention when our outer settlements were attacked. We have documentation of a conspiracy to keep humanity weak, dependent, and grateful for whatever scraps of protection the Council deigned to provide. The hologram shifted again, showing communication logs that several Council members immediately recognized. The Aquatic Collective's delegate, a being of water and consciousness held together by technology humanity barely understood, released a stream of bubbles that the translator rendered as profanity in 17 languages. This is an outrage, another delegate declared, their form pulsing with colors that indicated extreme agitation. You accuse sitting council members of conspiracy without presenting this evidence through proper channels. This is grounds for immediate expulsion from council membership. Chen smiled, and it was not a pleasant expression. We tried proper channels. 3 times. Each time, our complaints were lost in bureaucratic procedures, delayed by committee reviews, or simply ignored. So we decided to handle the Krell problem ourselves and present you with facts you couldn't ignore. She gestured to the hologram, which now showed the aftermath of the Proxima Centauri battle. The Krell fleet was scattered, broken. 70% of their military might destroyed or captured in less than 6 hours. Here's what's going to happen, Chen said, and her voice carried the authority of a species that had climbed from caves to starships through sheer bloody-minded determination. The Council is going to acknowledge that humanity has the right to defend itself without requiring permission or oversight. You will formally recognize our military as a sovereign force, subject to the same regulations and freedoms enjoyed by every other member species. You will investigate the conspiracy that led to the Krell attack, and those responsible will face consequences. The Prime Speaker's laughter was a sound like tectonic plates grinding together. And if we refuse? If we call your bluff and vote to expel humanity from the Council? Chen's expression didn't change. Then you'll discover that we prepared for that possibility too. Hidden throughout this chamber are monitoring devices that have been recording these proceedings. Everything said here today will be transmitted to every member species, every client civilization, and every independent colony in Council space. The galaxy will learn that the vaunted Galactic Council conspired to sacrifice innocent lives for political leverage. They'll see that the ancient protectors of galactic peace are willing to let thousands die to maintain their power structure. The implications hit the chamber like a shockwave. The Galactic Council's authority rested not on military might alone, but on the perception of wisdom, fairness, and benevolent guidance accumulated over thousands of years. A scandal of this magnitude would shatter that perception irreparably. Client species would rebel. Member civilizations would withdraw. The careful balance of power that had maintained relative peace for millennia would collapse into chaos. And humanity, the species they had dismissed as weak and fearful, would be the catalyst for everything they had built crumbling to dust. The Prime Speaker was silent for a long moment, his ancient mind processing scenarios and outcomes with computational speed. Finally, he spoke, and his voice carried a note of something that might have been admiration. You would burn down the entire galactic order rather than accept subjugation. You would risk interstellar chaos rather than bow to our authority. This is madness. No, Chen corrected gently. This is principle. This is us drawing a line and saying that we will not allow our people to be sacrificed for anyone's political games. This is us demanding the same respect and autonomy that every other species in this chamber enjoys. She deactivated the holographic projector and stood before them without props or visual aids, just one human woman facing down the accumulated power of galactic civilization. We didn't come to the stars to be victims. We didn't survive 10,000 years of our own violence just to become pawns in yours. We offered peace because we genuinely want it, because we know the cost of war better than any species here. But we will never, ever, accept peace that requires us to sacrifice our dignity, our sovereignty, or our people's lives. The crystalline mind delegate pulsed with light patterns that indicated deep thought. When it spoke, its voice was like music played on crystal bells. You speak of sovereignty, but you blackmail us with exposure. You claim to want peace, but you threaten chaos. How are these positions not contradictory? Chen nodded, acknowledging the question's validity. Because there's a difference between the peace of equals and the peace of the dominated. We're willing to compromise, to negotiate, to find solutions that benefit everyone. But those negotiations must happen between parties that respect each other, not between masters and servants. She looked around the chamber, meeting as many eyes, sensors, and perceptual organs as she could. Every species here has something they're proud of, some achievement or quality that defines them. The Saurians have their honor. The Vraxians have their ancient knowledge. The crystalline minds have their perfect logic. Humanity has survival. We have adaptation. We have the absolute, stubborn refusal to lie down and die just because someone stronger tells us to. That's not a threat. It's just who we are. The chamber fell into contemplative silence. Council members communicated with each other through channels humans couldn't perceive, debating, arguing, calculating the costs and benefits of various responses. The aquatic collective's delegate finally spoke, their voice carrying the weight of oceans. Let us assume, for the moment, that we accept your demands. That we acknowledge your sovereignty and investigate the conspiracy you allege. What guarantee do we have that humanity won't use its clearly considerable military capabilities to pursue imperial ambitions? What stops you from becoming the very threat you accuse others of being? It was a fair question, and Chen had a fair answer. The same thing that stopped us for the past 200 years since we achieved interstellar flight. Ourselves. She pulled up one more hologram, but this one was different. It showed not weapons or battle plans, but something far more powerful. It showed Earth's Parliament of Nations, a governing body that represented every nation, culture, and people on humanity's homeworld. Before we left our solar system, we made ourselves promise something. We wrote it into our constitution, carved it into monuments, taught it to every child born under our care. Never again. Never again would we let our capacity for violence override our capacity for reason. Never again would we pursue conquest at the cost of conscience. The hologram shifted, showing the faces of humans from every ethnicity, culture, and background that Earth had produced. Scientists and soldiers, artists and engineers, philosophers and farmers. We police ourselves more strictly than you could ever police us, Chen said quietly. Every member of our military takes an oath not just to defend humanity, but to defend the principles we claim to represent. Every commander knows that following illegal orders is not just a crime but a betrayal of everything we've fought to become. Every ship in our fleet operates under rules of engagement that prioritize civilian safety even at the cost of tactical advantage. She paused, letting that sink in. Can every species in this chamber say the same? Can you honestly claim that your military forces operate under such restrictions? That your commanders would refuse illegal orders even at personal cost? That your societies have confronted their capacity for evil and actively worked to prevent it? The silence was answer enough. The Galactic Council, for all its age and wisdom, had never faced the kind of existential reckoning that humanity had endured. They had never built weapons capable of ending their own existence and then chosen, collectively, to step back from that brink. They had never looked into the abyss of their own nature and committed to being better. They had simply continued, expanded, conquered or negotiated as circumstances required. But they had never transformed themselves the way humanity had. The Prime Speaker's mandibles clicked in a pattern that suggested deep thought. You paint a compelling picture of human restraint, Ambassador. But restraint born from fear of oneself is still just fear. How long before a generation arises that doesn't remember the horrors that taught you caution? How long before your principles erode under pressure or convenience? Chen's expression softened slightly, showing a glimpse of the weight she carried. That's the work, isn't it? That's the eternal struggle. Every generation has to choose again to be better. We teach our children about the wars. We make sure they understand what we're capable of. Not to traumatize them, but to inoculate them against the seductive simplicity of violence as a solution. The Vraxian Prime Speaker leaned back in his seat, a gesture that suggested a decision had been reached. The Council will deliberate on your demands, Ambassador Chen. You have given us much to consider, and frankly, much to regret about our assumptions regarding your species. He paused, and something in his posture shifted from judicial authority to something almost resembling respect between equals. But before we adjourn, I would ask you a personal question, if you would permit it. Chen nodded, curious despite herself. In all our observations of humanity, in all our intelligence gathering and analysis, we noticed something peculiar. Your species explores voraciously. You build, create, and innovate with stunning speed. Yet you expand slowly, almost reluctantly. You have the capability to claim dozens of systems, yet you maintain presence in only a handful. Why? If you are not afraid, if you are as capable as you claim, why do you not grow faster? It was a perceptive question, and it deserved an honest answer. Chen considered her words carefully before responding. Because we remember what happens when we expand too quickly, consume too voraciously, claim too much without consideration for consequences. We nearly destroyed our homeworld that way. We fought wars over resources we had depleted through greed and short-sightedness. We learned, painfully, that growth without wisdom is just another form of suicide. She gestured to the vast chamber around them. Every species here has expanded across the stars. You've claimed worlds, built empires, established dominion over vast reaches of space. And you've done it so successfully that you forgot one of the fundamental truths of existence: more isn't always better. Bigger isn't always stronger. Sometimes, restraint is the greatest demonstration of power. The Prime Speaker's clicking took on a contemplative rhythm. You judge us even as we judge you. No, Chen corrected. I'm observing you the same way you've been observing us. The difference is, I'm sharing my observations rather than keeping them secret while plotting how to exploit perceived weaknesses. The directness of her statement brought sounds of discomfort from several council members, but also notes of reluctant acknowledgement. We humans have a saying: those who do not learn from history are doomed to repeat it. We've spent our entire existence learning from our mistakes, often at terrible cost. When we look at the Galactic Council, we see a lot of the same patterns we fell into. The assumption of superiority. The casual dismissal of those deemed weaker. The willingness to sacrifice others for the greater good without asking those others if they consent to being sacrificed. She took a breath. We're not trying to lecture you. We're trying to share what we learned before it costs you what it cost us. The chamber fell into a different kind of silence now. Not the silence of judgment or calculation, but the silence of genuine reflection. These ancient beings, accustomed to being the teachers, the guides, the wise elders of galactic civilization, found themselves confronted with perspectives they had not considered in millennia. The crystalline mind delegate pulsed with a pattern that indicated uncertainty, a rare emotional state for beings of pure logic. If we accept your sovereignty, if we reform the practices you find objectionable, what does humanity offer in return? What benefit do we gain from treating you as equals rather than useful subordinates? Chen smiled, and this time it was genuine, warm, the expression of someone about to share a gift. Everything you've been missing by treating us as subordinates. Our innovation. Our perspective. Our solutions to problems you've stopped seeing as solvable because you've been approaching them the same way for thousands of years. She activated the holographic projector one last time, and it showed human achievements that had nothing to do with war. Medical advances that could extend life across species barriers. Agricultural techniques that could turn barren worlds fertile. Engineering marvels that made impossible constructions possible. Art, music, literature, philosophy, all the products of a species that had learned to channel its intensity into creation rather than destruction. We're good at war because we practiced it for 10,000 years, Chen said softly. But we're even better at peace because we've spent the last 2 centuries learning to build instead of destroy, to heal instead of harm, to create instead of conquer. Imagine what we could accomplish together if you stopped seeing us as threats or tools and started seeing us as partners. The hologram showed collaborative projects, human scientists working alongside alien researchers, human engineers consulting with Vraxian architects, human artists inspiring crystalline mind composers. This is what you're saying no to every time you decide to keep us weak. This is what you're sacrificing on the altar of maintaining control. We came to the stars hoping to find friends, teachers, partners in the grand adventure of existence. We found a council that wanted subjects instead. We're offering you the chance to get what we hoped for instead of what we found. The prime speaker was quiet for a long moment, and when he finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of difficult decisions made. The council will adjourn to deliberate. You will have our answer within 3 planetary rotations. Chen bowed respectfully, the gesture of an equal showing courtesy rather than a subordinate showing deference. As she turned to leave, the prime speaker spoke again. Ambassador Chen. Regardless of our decision, you have taught us something valuable today. You have reminded us that strength comes in many forms, and wisdom can emerge from the youngest as well as the oldest. Chen paused at the door, looking back at the assembled might of galactic civilization. Prime Speaker, may I offer one final observation? At his gesture of permission, she continued. Every species in this chamber achieved greatness through struggle. The Saurians conquered their high gravity through evolutionary pressure. The Vraxians survived extinction events that would have ended lesser species. The crystalline minds transcended physical limitation through sheer determination. You all know the value of adversity because you all overcame it. She gestured to encompass the entire council. Humanity's adversity was ourselves. Our challenge wasn't surviving our environment or overcoming external threats. It was learning to survive each other, to overcome our own nature. Maybe that's why we see things differently. We know what it's like to be both the threatened and the threat, the victim and the perpetrator. We know that the line between civilization and barbarism is thinner than anyone wants to admit, and that crossing it is easier than crossing back. The chamber was absolutely still. When you deliberate, Chen said quietly, ask yourselves this, do you want humanity as it could be, desperate and cornered, forced to use every terrible skill we've mastered? Or do you want humanity as we're trying to become, partners in building something better than any of us could achieve alone? She left without waiting for an answer, her footsteps echoing through the ancient chamber. Behind her, the Galactic Council sat in contemplative silence, ancient beings forced to confront uncomfortable truths by a species they had dismissed as fearful children. The irony was not lost on them. Humanity had indeed feared war, but not in the way the Council had assumed. Humans feared it the way a recovering addict fears their substance of choice, with intimate knowledge of its power and terrible awareness of what it could make them become. And that fear, born from hard-won wisdom rather than weakness, made them far more dangerous than any species that had never confronted its own capacity for destruction. 3 days later, the Galactic Council would announce sweeping reforms and recognize humanity as a sovereign military power with full rights and privileges. They would launch investigations into the conspiracy surrounding the Krell attack, and several high-ranking delegates would quietly resign. But more importantly, they would begin to understand what humanity had been trying to tell them all along, that true strength lies not in the capacity to destroy, but in the wisdom to choose not to, and the courage to stand firm when that choice is tested. And in the years that followed, as human innovation began to flow freely through council space, as human perspectives helped solve problems that had seemed unsolvable, as human restraint demonstrated that power and wisdom need not be enemies, the galaxy would learn what Ambassador Chen had known all along. Humanity didn't fear war. They had mastered it so completely that they understood peace was the harder path, the braver choice, the stronger position. And they had chosen it not because they were weak, but because they were strong enough to make that choice and defend it against anyone who mistook restraint for surrender. The stars themselves seemed to shine a little brighter, as if the universe itself approved of a species that had looked into the darkness, recognized it as their own reflection, and chosen to be the light instead.